As I've mentioned before on this channel, I tend to do things backwards. And when it comes to riding motorcycles off-road, that is the exact wrong way of going about things. I started my motorcycle journey on pavement by riding what was at the time both types of bikes, cruisers and sport bikes. Then I took a bit of a break from owning a motorcycle, though I still rented them here and there for fun. And when I decided to come back to the sport, I went with a Moto Guzzi Stelvio 1200 NTX, a 600 plus pound ADV. I thought, I'll try riding off-road. I had no off-road riding experience except for mountain biking and racing cyclocross, but how different could the skills be? As it turned out, operating a 600-pound motorcycle and a 20-pound bicycle was quite different, and the Stelvio terrified me off-road. I traded that bike in for a Yamaha Tenere 700, which is listed at 452 pounds, and immediately went riding off-road with a group of guys on dual sports, which were between 100 and 200 pounds lighter than my Tenere. On the T7, my engine guards and bag mounting hardware probably brought the weight up to over 480 pounds, and the stock Pirelli Scorpion STR tires were definitely no match for the deep sand. I made it through the ride, but it was clear I needed more experience and that I was over my head on such a heavy bike. Then my wife Brooke upgraded her motorcycle to the Honda CRF 300L Rally, and I took that out on the trails and was able to ride stuff I found too challenging on the Tenere. Finally, Brooke sold the Honda, and I bought a lightly used Yamaha WR250F Enduro bike, a proper performance dirt bike which I've been riding for a year now. And let me tell you, since getting this thing, my skills have definitely leveled up, and incredibly, I'm finding that I can now easily ride my T7 on some seriously gnarly terrain. Now, I'm no enduro ace, but I've come a long way as an off-road enthusiast, and so this is a good time to answer the question, how good is a T7 off-road? Not under a dirt riding god like Paul Torres, who routinely does things on Teneres that most of us would never attempt on the most off-road worthy dirt bikes, but under your average hobby rider. Could a guy like me take this bike and ride trails made for the real enduro bikes? In this video we'll find out. Plus, stay tuned till the end to see the suspension settings I use on the T7 for the best combination of on-off-road performance. And as always, if you're enjoying the content, please consider helping the small channel by subscribing, liking the video, and sharing it with friends. So I won't lie, filming this video scared me a little bit. I've taken this T7 on milder single track, but there's single track and then there's single track. And my intention for this video was to test the T7 out on a trail I've only ever done on my wife's rally 3 years ago, the two very light Sur-Ron bikes I reviewed 2 years ago, and the 290-pound Honda XR150L I tested last year. This trail scared me on the rally back in the day, so adding 140 pounds worth of bike and attempting it now made me nervous. But I am a much better rider now with much more experience, and I told myself I'd take it slow, try not to break any speed records, and prioritize safety. I scouted the trail on my WR the day before and actually did break my own time record on it, some 30 seconds faster than I did the same trail on the two Sur-Rons. Again, my improved skills and the WR's awesome KYB suspension can be thanked for that. My best WR time was right around 14 minutes and 7 seconds on a trail with plenty of twists and turns, many long and steep climbs, some large roots and rock gardens, and a scary section that skirts the edge of a steep drop on the left. I always tiptoe this part, as one mistake here means a good long tumble down the hill. After conquering this fairly technical route on the Enduro bike, I headed back to the scene of the crime on the Tenere 700. It should be noted that I just got new tires on the T7, replacing the great on-road but not so hot off-road stock Pirelli Scorpion Rally STRs. My new tires, Michelin Anarchy Wows, with much more aggressive knobbies. These are 50-50 tires, 50% on-road, 50% off-road. I dropped the air pressure from 30 to 20 psi, not as low as the 15 I run on my WR, but the Tenere is more than 200 pounds heavier and I don't run rim locks on it. Finally, you may notice that my low fuel warning is flashing in this video. Just to be safe, I left myself enough gas to get home, but not much more. This bike gets a lot more top heavy with the tank full. I warmed up on some less technical trails with deep sand, and the new tires bit into the surface nicely. I took it easy as these are two-way trails and you don't want to go screaming around blind corners and run into an ATV. And no problem so far. The bike handled everything well. Then I headed over to a shorter piece of single track, the less technical one. There are fewer twists and turns and steep climbs on this one, but it's still challenging. The most difficult part is an uphill right turn with some huge roots in the way, where the WR250F went through without incident. The T7 required me to touch down and do some paddling. Having made it through this trail like I always do on the T7, I proceeded to the longer and more technical trail, the one I've only tackled on much lighter motorcycles. I showed this trail some serious respect as it contains many technical and twisty climbs and descents, and often routes through deep grooves requiring a taller bike. Last year on the XR150L, which is a shorter bike, I was dragging the pegs on the sides of these trenches, but the Tenere cleared most of them. The 9.5 inches of ground clearance was almost good enough to make it through without incident. I touched down the pegs a couple of times and hit the bash plate once, but the Tenere did a lot better than the XR150L. The tires and huge torque may have played some part in that, as the big T7 trucked up most of the hills no problem. The weight of the bike definitely meant that I had to tiptoe through some sections, especially the tight switchbacks going up and down hills, but it also gave the rear wheel more traction on the climbs. I made it through, but obviously not as fast or aggressively as on my WR. On the long and steep downhills, the suspension kept the bike composed as well. This was all done at moderate to slow speeds, as the Tenere 700 is a motorcycle that will fill you with confidence because it handles a bunch of difficult terrain and then bites you very suddenly when you push it over its limits. It's usually not a gradual feeling of, uh-oh, this is getting too much. It's more like, wow, this bike can go over anything, to boom, you're down. And I've been down many times on this bike, that's why I go slowly. Better to have a slow speed tip over than a high speed crash. But this time there were no crashes or tip overs. The T7 made it through the technical stuff shockingly well, albeit slowly. The T7's time, 21 minutes, 7 minutes slower than the WR. A big difference to be sure, but hey, safety first. It was steady in the twists and mostly unbothered by the bumps and obstacles. I did hit some larger roots that unsettled the bike briefly, but never in a serious way. Worst comes to worst, you can just stall the motorcycle intentionally and come to a stop with the wheel locked in gear. But is the T7 good at this? Depends on what you mean by good. It's not as good as an enduro bike, obviously, and it's not as good as big dual sports like the Honda XR650L or KTM 690 either, though you could go riding with a bunch of guys on bikes like that, they'd just be waiting for you a bit. But if you have a little bit of skill, you can do surprisingly well on some pretty gnarly trails, if you have the skill, and good tires. And a mostly empty tank helps too. Now, you don't develop these skills by trading in your MT-07 for a T7. You develop them on a light dirt bike or maybe a dual sport, and if you have no experience on dirt, that dirt bike should not be a 300 2-stroke or 450 4-stroke. I keep up with much faster bikes on my 4-stroke 250 because on technical trails, power does not matter. In fact, it can make a motorcycle harder to ride. Which brings us to one of the few criticisms I have of the T7 off-road besides the obvious weight-related one: power, and specifically how that power is delivered. The Tenere 700 swing arm is mounted high so that the power is directed down into the trail. This is great as it gives the bike very good traction on dirt. However, it also means that the throttle is abrupt and can be snatchy off the bottom. On pavement, this is a small annoyance, but on a technical trail, when you're hugging the edge of a steep drop, it could make for a bad day. And the T7 does not have rider modes or traction control to tame that power. On this bike, your clutch hand is your traction control, and it takes some practice to tame 70 plus ponies on these trails. That's why you start small and go larger rather than doing what I did. Having said that, in the upper rev range, the power is very linear and predictable. So the answer to the question this video asked at the beginning is that the T7 is surprisingly better off-road than I thought, if you have dirt riding experience and if you're patient. If you ride it fast, it'll do that too, but you are closer to that edge, and the Tenere goes over the edge very quickly and suddenly. This bike has many strengths. The riding position, both sitting and standing, works for a 6-footer like me. It's well balanced and composed. It climbs like a mountain goat with the right tires. It has decent ground clearance, excellent smooth and very predictable power delivery except right off the bottom, and suspension I can work with. Weaknesses? Stock tires, change them for serious off-roading. Snatchy throttle, you're basically riding the clutch most of the way at low revs, especially when in first gear. And of course the weight. So yeah, you can go on a cross-country ride with all your gear and even with a passenger on a T7, and then when you get where you're going, join some friends on a dirt ride. However, at some point you're going to run into a wall beyond which the Tenere 700 will not venture. Riding the gnarly stuff on this bike is more a matter of making it through than attacking the trail. It'll do well, it's just nowhere near as fun as it is on a bike made specifically for this stuff. There are just so many more things that can go wrong on a bike this heavy and this powerful. It's also harder to lift and more exhausting to manhandle around the trail. If this is the type of riding you want to do with the occasional run on pavement to get to these places, there are better dual sports for the job. This is a full-on adventure bike with remarkable, for its size, off-road abilities. Approach with caution. As for me, I'll ride this on more accessible trails and do my dirt biking on my WR250F. The trails are a lot more fun on a 260-pound bike. But before I do that, I promised you my suspension settings. This is the original T7 with a standard suspension. I weigh about 180 pounds, 82 kilos without gear. Add helmet, boots, and all the other armor, plus a bag on my back or panniers, and we're well over 200 pounds or 90 kilos. So I set up my suspension a bit stiffer than the factory settings, which I hear are dialed in for a 75 kilo or 165 pound rider. I didn't go too stiff though, because then the ride would be too harsh on the slower trails I like to do. I found these settings to be a good compromise between off-road and pavement performance. Here they are. T7 compression is adjusted on the bottom of the forks on each side. You basically go down here. There is a rubber seal, which I'm not going to remove right now, but the compression screw is underneath there. And you can click that all the way closed. So basically all the way to the right, clockwise, and then click it back 7 clicks, and that's the compression I run on my T7. Rebound is adjusted on top of the forks on these 2 screws, one on each side. I close them up all the way closed and then click it back 11 clicks. On the shock, the compression is adjusted with the screw at the top, and I go all the way to the right, so all the way clockwise, and then adjust it back 7 clicks. At the bottom of the shock, we have the rebound screw, and you go all the way to the right, clockwise, and then adjust it back 11 clicks. Spring preload is set with this little knob over here. Where you set it depends on how heavy you are, how heavy your passenger is, whether you're carrying a passenger, whether you're carrying bags. The factory setting is 10, and you're just going to have to figure out where and how much weight you need to carry on this bike in order to set that properly. So I hope you found that helpful. I was equal measures scared and excited riding these trails, and thrilled that my skills have advanced to the point where they're not that hard anymore, even on the Tenere. And even though I won't be riding the T7 on this kind of terrain often, it's nice to know that it and I can do it. There are many bikes that can do it better, but not many of them would make good cross-country highway tourers. But what do you think? Did seeing a regular guy off-road this bike make you more likely to buy it, or are you looking for something much smaller for the trail? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Ride safe, and may the spokes be with you.